Today I'm bringing you a pretty fun trace rifle build, and this is just about scorching every single enemy in a room and just watching them all burn. We're using Prometheus Lens, which has a init plus 10% damage to all Scorch and Ignite it causes, and then we're going to pair this with Dawn Chorus, the exotic helmet for Warlocks. It boosts all Scorch damage by plus 200%, and then we're taking the artifact perks, which are the catalyst for this for trace rifles, and the main one is Harsh Refraction, which gives us 35% more damage to enemies afflicted by a matching elemental debuff, like Scorch. And you can just see this is a Legend campaign mission. We are flying through it, scorching everything. This Prometheus Lens circle is just getting huge until it hits everything. And on top of this, because we have Overload Trace Rifle this episode, we get to exhaust every enemy we hit with this, which means 25 to 35% less damage out of them. The biggest issue here is ammo. That's just the result of using a special weapon. I've already run out of ammo here after defeating everything but the boss. That's okay, because we have great supers on solar. Just have to wait just a second, and we're good. So, if that sounds good to you, let's get into it. I'm Engineer. Just for an overview of the build, our goal is to scorch as many enemies as possible with the strongest scorch damage in game. Use is Ad Clear Deluxe. This is a primo Ad Clear build. And content level, I've tested this to 15 power level under. You could probably go a little bit higher, but this will eventually run into issues because there's no damage resistance. On the pro side, so much AoE, very strong healing, and it's easy. You just kind of point and shoot. The biggest thing is just making sure you put your buffs up right before you get kills. On the con side, keeping buffs up requires a constant stream of enemies. If the enemies are scattered, this isn't going to work as well, and you're going to have your buffs like Restoration and Radiant fall off. It's kind of medium boss damage. You can see in the earlier gameplay and later gameplay, you can shred some health pretty fast on bosses, but it's not great DPS, so I wouldn't bring it into raid or dungeon boss encounter. Special ammo is a problem. It's always a little bit hard to find, and we're going to run through it pretty fast just using it a lot, so to keep that in mind. And this is very artifact reliant. We're heavily using some artifact perks here to make this extra good, and that'll go away. But for right now, we still have several months of this artifact, so we're going to take advantage of it. Briefly, just want to touch on Scorch and Ignition and scaling. I'm not going to read all this. Go check out the Destiny Data Compendium where this is from. It's delightful and linked in the description. But the biggest point is that Scorch and Ignition inherit all buffs from their source. But on a given target, it's all about what scorches first. So whatever applies the first scorch, that controls all the scorch and all the ignition until it is cleared, and then it starts again. So if your weapon with, say, plus 100% damage from various things inflicts the first scorch, then all the scorch that's put on it until it's ignited when that scorch maxes out and is cleared also inherits that. But if something with no damage bonus inflicts the scorch first, then that is what you get from then on. So just keep in mind with some of the effects that we're talking about, but it gets a little bit complicated. But on top of that, like, Scorch scales extremely well. So if you can stack up some buffs, you can do a lot of damage. So first, our main weapon is Prometheus Lens, and our goal here is just maximum Scorch on as many enemies as possible. When the Trace Rifle artifact perks came out, I went and looked through every single exotic Trace Rifle, and this one kind of stuck out to me, especially that line about dealing 10% increased damage on solar effects. So I decided to go all in on that. Actually made this build like the first day of this act, but just haven't had a chance to make a video about it. Now, if you haven't used it before, when you are shooting continuously and hitting enemies, there's a scorching field that expands over time, and it can get very, very large, but you can't let off the trigger. It applies Scorch every 20 hits, which is pretty frequent because trace rifles fire at a RPM of 900 rounds per minute. You'll get 10 Scorch normally, or 20 with Ember of Ashes. And then as you get kills, it also refills the magazine. Lastly, if you have the Catalyst, you get the Incandescent trait just for even more Scorch on the field and an AoE. Now, for other weapons, it's not a big deal. It doesn't really matter much to this build, but if you really want a recommendation, maybe take a Strand weapon in your Kinetic Darkness slot just to spread some unravel, and then on your heavy, just take Solar Heavies because we're going to match some Solar Surges. Our exotic is Dawn Chorus. If you don't have this, you need to own Beyond Light. Then you can get it from Rahul's Novel Decryption or Vex Strike Force. There's three main features to it. The first is that it gives Daybreak projectiles, that's your Throwing Fire Swords super, Scorch on hit, and it gives them 90% increased damage. And interesting interaction here, that Scorch is actually usually applied twice because of how those projectiles work. And then the main benefit we're taking advantage of here is that Scorch deals plus 200% increased damage. And on top of that, you will get 5% melee ability energy every time Scorch ticks, which is a lot in this build. Now, that Scorch buff does not apply to ignitions, which is good to note, so we really want to keep the uptime on Scorch as high as possible. On our aspects and abilities, it's really straightforward. Because we are so focused on our weapon, I recommend taking Touch of Flame to use with healing grenades so we can get Restoration too. That'll keep us alive and we'll be getting lots of solar kills to keep that up. For the second aspect, I generally recommend Hellion. It's great passive damage. It will do different scorching damage, so you definitely want to try and hit enemies before it does, but it will also help build up some of those ignitions, which is pretty cool. The other aspects, Heat Rises and Icarus Dash, are viable options too, but I just don't think the aerial gameplay really fits with this build because of how long you want to be on the trigger. For your super, you actually have some options here. While Dawn Chorus does boost Daybreak, it actually ends up doing more total damage with Song of Flame and generally a little bit more DPS, but only if you're using exclusively incinerator snaps. On the flip side though, Daybreak is classified as a roaming super where Song of Flame is not, so if you want higher uptime, take Daybreak, and if you want a little bit more damage, take Song of Flame. For the grenade, as I already mentioned, we're taking Healing Grenade, which has an 87.5% flak gain factor, but you could potentially use damage grenades too if you don't need the excess healing. For your melee, Celestial Fire is good for boss fights at range, and Incinerator Snap is good for mobile play, but definitely take Incinerator Snap if you're using Song of Flame because it will do more damage. On your class ability, we take Phoenix Dive because that has the shortest cooldown, and that gives you more uptime on Hellion and a good panic heal. Over on the fragments, we want to take Ember of Ashes because that will give us roughly 50% more Scorch, and this build is all about scorching. And I did mention it earlier, but Scorch damage scales higher the Scorch stacks, but it's kind of a tricky balance because when you reach 100 Scorch stacks, then you get Ignition, which clears all Scorch. We're going to take Ember of Torches because that gives us 20% weapon damage whenever we get a powered melee hit, and we get that for 8 seconds or 12 seconds if we take Ember of Solace. And then we're going to take Ember of Empyrean, which will let us extend both Radiant and Restoration by getting solar kills, and that's weapon or ability. Lastly, we're going to take Ember of Char, so those ignitions that are clearing out our Scorch stacks also apply Scorch to nearby enemies, and that is going to be 60 thanks to Ember of Ashes for us. It does not apply to the ignited enemy though, so if you have a single boss that you're frequently igniting, they are not going to get these Scorch stacks applied back to them from Char. Some other ones to think about: Ember of Benevolence will give you plus 400% base grenade, melee, and class ability regen speed for 6 seconds every time you apply Cure, Radiant, Restoration, or healing from Healing Rifts to allies, which is pretty huge, and we're doing it pretty frequently with Ember of Torches and our Healing Grenade. But this isn't really an ability focused build, so you probably don't really need this. Lastly, Ember of Solace will give you a longer timer on Restoration and Radiance, which can help you just have a little bit more uptime and be a little more forgiving. Moving over mods and armor stats, we're generally going to build for Orbs and Super, and solar weapon damage, and special ammo. And then lastly on that, we're generally going to build for orbs and super, and then build for solar weapon damage, and also build a little bit for special ammo generation because we're very focused on using a special ammo weapon. We're not using a damaging grenade, so we're going to use melee focused things like hands-on the helmet and heavy-handed on the gauntlets. For orb generation, heavy-handed will be one of our main sources, and then a harmonic siphon, which will make all the solar weapon kills generate orbs. On our class item, we will also be taking Reapers, so when we use that class ability to get Hellion, we will generate another orb on our next weapon kill. On the legs, we use triple weapon surge, and because of that, we use time dilation on the class item so that those surges last longer. For ammo, we will use a special ammo finder on the head. It doesn't progress very fast using a special ammo weapon, but every little bit helps. And we will also have special ammo finisher on the class item. This does require 3 armor charges to work, and it will wipe out all your armor charges because we only have 3, so keep that in mind and just look out for good opportunities to keep the loop going. One thing to consider if you're really starved for ammo is a solar scavenger on the legs. That will give you more ammo whenever you do pick up a special ammo brick, so that you don't have to quite fight for that ammo as much. On our armor stats, you want to max out resilience, and then you generally want to boost discipline and strength as high as you can, and then just get recovery and intellect to at least 30, and that's about all you need to do with the build. Our artifact perks, these are all from the bottom row as of Act 2, and they are all trace rifle related perks. So we're going to take Overload Trace Rifle, which lets our weapon exhaust. And as you can see in these notes on the bottom, exhaust makes an enemy do 25% less damage. And if you take the Disruptor Spike artifact perk, which makes exhaust do even more, you do 35% less damage, which is crazy good. In column 2, you have Beam Medic, which will heal you when you get rapid kills with trace rifles, and this is one of the best trace rifles to do that with. We don't have exact numbers on it, but it seems pretty substantial and is just another thing to back up your restoration. Harsh Refraction is going to give you that 35% increased damage as long as the enemy is scorched. And then lastly, in column 5, this doesn't really synergize too much with the build, but if you take Limit Break, you get 30% increased super ability damage for 8 seconds, as long as you have a buff matching your element or your critical health when you cast your super. So that's an extra 30% damage as long as you have Radiant or Restoration on you, which we tend to do all the time. But you need to add 1 to each of these. So if it's 20%, you add 1 to it, so it's 120%, and you do that for each of them and then multiply them. I have a spreadsheet, which I will link in the description, that can do this math for you. It's a little bit tricky though, but generally we have Radiant, Prometheus Lens, Dawn Cores, 3 times Weapon Surge, and the Harsh Refraction trait, and all those together will give us plus 552% scorched damage, which is crazy. If you saw in the gameplay, enemies dying very fast, even at 15 power level under, and it's because of this. This is absolutely min-maxing the amount of scorched damage you can get. I don't think there's anything that can go higher in the game. So with that, let's look at some more gameplay. All right, this is the opening of Contest of the Elders, and I just like it because it's a big arena with a lot of enemies, and it is perfect for a build like this. You can see we are just spinning around with the trace rifle and scorching stuff. It's usually better if you have clumped up enemies, but right now it's just kind of scattered enemies around. These are also Cabal enemies, which tend to be just a little bit beefier than some factions, so that'll let us actually get to show you how the Scorch works. One thing that you kind of have to work with this build is you want to keep it on targets longer to get the larger Scorch bubble, but you also have to be careful of ammo, so it's kind of a balancing act between having more AoE and using up your ammo faster. You can see here these kind of elite level enemies floating around. Fight one in a second. For small enemies, it really just burns through pretty fast. Yeah, so we have this Exhumed Prisoner and just absolutely chunked down in seconds. Trace rifles have great range, they have pretty good ammo economy, you just have to make sure you're picking up some ammo. So you're just churning through these groups. You may also notice that we are in very little danger of dying, and that is due to the strength of Restoration 2 and the Beam Medic artifact perk. A little ignition there. Most of the enemies aren't getting to ignition, which is actually good in this case because we want to keep the Scorch on them as long as possible. Just get our restoration back up with our grenade. And then we're just going to use our super to kind of clear out crowds even faster. So to do maximum damage with Song of Flame, we just want to focus on the snaps as much as possible. Which also gives you just a little bit of time that you can shoot if you want to. We're pretty much out of ammo here though, so we're going to have to be a little careful. You can see Scorch and Ignition just does great damage. We're wearing down this mini boss enemy here very quickly. And we still have our normal incinerator snaps to wear on the boss too. A little bit of ammo left, and we will just focus on this boss with Hellion and burn him down in just a few seconds. And he's gone. Like I said, very straightforward. The biggest thing is just making sure to time your buffs so that you can get them up and keep them going. So you want a Phoenix Dive for Hellion because that's not a buff you really need to refresh with weapon kills. Drop your healing grenade for Restoration 2, and then you can use your powered melee on enemies that you know you will kill, which will give you Radiant and boost the duration of Restoration 2. And then you want to immediately start shooting Prometheus Lens to extend both those buffs. Try and hold the fire and keep on enemies as much as possible. Then on top of this, just use your super as needed. You're probably going to get it up pretty fast, so just take advantage of it and use it for even more clear when you need to. And that's pretty much it. Just to wrap up, I just sent back on the build for you so you can see the pros and cons. I hope you've enjoyed the build. I think this one's really fun, and it's a great use of these new Trace Rifle artifact perks. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments or if you have any other build ideas. Act 3 is launching next week, so there will be lots of exciting things. I've got a few builds cooking in my brain based on those artifact perks, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the values on those are and seeing how viable they are and what builds they kind of trigger. But with that, that's all I've got for today. Hope you have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.